It started when or at least the family says, it started when my mom showed me a pocket watch that my great-grandfather owned. And apparently I was smitten. And since then, the first shot of me on our home movies is me sitting in a stroller asking whether the person with the camera has a watch on. So I was taken. I would get them from garage sales and tear them apart, and I would ask my dad to take pictures of them anywhere we went, so I've got photo books full of just random clocks, just wherever. And so I kind of did that on my own until high school, when I took one to a clock shop and asked them to clean it, because I didn't have the tools to do that. And they ended up offering me a job, so that was my high school job, was to work in a clock shop. And so from there I've just sort of collected what I've been interested in. I've never really given a whole lot of thought, at least in the early days, I didn't give a lot of thought to the criteria for what I was collecting. I kind of just collected what was handy, what I could find at garage sales and stuff. We've seen so much transformation in the 20th century, the last 100 years, in the way at least household clocks are made. And so what I own kind of runs the gamut of the different kinds of clocks that you can have, because sort of the big major change that happened over the 20th century was that we moved from mechanical timekeeping to electronic timekeeping. And in particular, as far as household clocks like these are concerned, we went from mechanical sources of power, which are like coiled springs and weights and things like that, to electric or electronic sources of power, which would be like the alternating current that comes out of the plug in the wall, or direct current, which is batteries. And then we also shifted the way we do timekeeping from mechanical timekeepers like pendulums and balance wheels and things like that to electric timekeepers, which would be the frequency of the alternating current that the power company supplies, or a quartz crystal. There's this kind of transitional period where clockmakers were trying to find some way to reconcile electronic power with a mechanical regulator of some kind. And I just find those so interesting, because they're these little Rube Goldberg machines. I mean, clocks are interesting anyway, but to someone like me that kind of has seen a lot of different types of them, there's just some really interesting designs that came out of those 20 years. Probably the most famous one, as pitched on Mad Men, is the famous Bulova Accutron, which I happen to be wearing one of. A brilliant Swiss engineer working for Bulova called Max Hetzel. Being the late 50s, he had just heard about the invention of the transistor, which for this purpose is essentially a switch that you can switch using electricity. So you can use it to build a circuit that kind of governs itself. And so he used it to have a battery make a tuning fork vibrate. And so these watches have a tuning fork that vibrates at 360 hertz, 360 times a second, which is somewhere between F and an F sharp above middle C. And they have a tiny ratchet on the side of one of the tines, and they just push the hand around. So when you hold it up to your ear and you hear it, it's humming at that F sharp tone, but what you're actually hearing is technically it's ticking 360 times a second. And I just think that's really interesting, because you can't buy anything like that today, because these were designs that were born out of necessity. I've had people ask me, why do you find these interesting? It's a really difficult question to answer, and the best answer I've come up with is that they sort of bring together a whole lot of different disciplines that are interesting. So there's music, there's math, there's product design, there's industrial design, there's graphic design, there's artistry, and all of that sort of comes together to make this object that is both aesthetically interesting but also practically interesting, because it gives you information. It's one of the earliest forms of information design.